The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gardens as William stood at his office window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the roses his grandmother had planted decades ago. His hands trembled slightly as he held the phone, listening to the doctor's words that would change everything. The conversation lasted only 3 minutes, but those 180 seconds felt like a lifetime. "Your Royal Highness, I'm afraid the tests have confirmed our worst fears." Dr. Harrison's voice was gentle but firm through the speaker. "The cancer has spread more aggressively than we initially anticipated. We're looking at weeks, perhaps a month at most." William closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the crown he would soon inherit pressing down on his shoulders like never before. His father, King Charles, had been battling this illness for 8 months now, but everyone had hoped for more time. The public knew he was unwell, but they had no idea how serious things had become. After ending the call, William sat in silence for nearly an hour. Staff members knocked on his door twice, but he couldn't bring himself to respond. Outside, life continued as normal. Tourists gathered at the palace gates, taking photos and hoping for a glimpse of royalty. Children laughed as they played in the nearby park. The world kept spinning, unaware that their future king was grappling with the most difficult moment of his life. Catherine found him there when she returned from her morning engagement at a local charity. She took one look at his face and knew immediately that something terrible had happened. Without saying a word, she closed the office door behind her and sat down beside him on the small sofa, where they often discussed their daily schedules. "How long?" she asked quietly, taking his hand in hers. "Dr. Harrison says weeks, maybe a month." William's voice was barely above a whisper. "The treatments aren't working anymore. Papa wants to stop all the aggressive interventions. He wants to come home." Catherine squeezed his hand tighter. They had been preparing for this moment for months, but nothing could have truly readied them for the reality of it. Charles had been more than just a father to William. He had been his mentor, his guide into the complex world of royal duty, and his closest confidant in matters of state. "What about the children?" Catherine asked, her own voice breaking slightly. "How do we tell them their grandfather is dying?" This question hit William harder than anything else. George, Charlotte, and Louis adored their grandfather. Charles had been the fun grandparent who taught them about nature, told them stories about the history of their family, and always had time for their questions no matter how busy his schedule became. The thought of seeing the light fade from their eyes when they learned the truth was almost unbearable. "We'll tell them together. Tonight after dinner," William decided. "They deserve to know the truth, but we'll explain it in a way they can understand. George is old enough to grasp what's happening, but Charlotte and Louis will need more careful handling." The afternoon brought a series of difficult phone calls. William contacted his brother Harry in California, his voice steady as he delivered the news. Despite their strained relationship over the past few years, this was family, and family came together during times like these. Harry's response was immediate. He would be on the next available flight to London. Next came calls to other family members, senior palace staff, and government officials who needed to be prepared for what was coming. Each conversation required William to relive the morning's devastating news, but he pushed through, knowing that proper preparation now would help everyone navigate the challenging weeks ahead. The Prime Minister was informed during a secure phone call that lasted 25 minutes. Constitutional procedures needed to be reviewed, security arrangements had to be adjusted, and media strategies required immediate attention. The palace's communications team would need to craft statements that honored Charles's privacy while preparing the nation for significant changes ahead. As evening approached, William found himself in the palace kitchen, something that would have been unthinkable just a few hours earlier. He needed to do something normal, something that reminded him of simpler times. The kitchen staff were surprised, but understanding when he asked to make tea for his family himself. It was a small gesture, but it gave him a sense of control when everything else felt chaotic. Catherine joined him, and together they prepared a simple dinner. They worked in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the conversation they would soon have with their children. The normalcy of chopping vegetables and setting the table provided a brief respite from the overwhelming emotions of the day. When the children arrived for dinner, Their cheerful chatter filled the dining room. George talked excitedly about his history lesson. Charlotte shared funny stories from her ballet class, and little Louis showed everyone the drawing he had made of the family dog. For a few precious moments, William allowed himself to forget about the outside world and simply be a father enjoying time with his children. But reality couldn't be postponed forever. After dessert, William and Catherine exchanged a meaningful look. It was time. They gathered the children in the family's private sitting room, the same room where William's own father had once explained difficult family matters to him when he was young. "We need to talk to you about something very important," William began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. "It's about Grandpapa Charles." The children's faces grew serious immediately. Even young Louis seemed to sense that something significant was happening. George, at 11 years old, had already begun to understand the weight of responsibility that came with their family name. Charlotte, 9, was perceptive beyond her years, and 6-year-old Louis, though the youngest, was remarkably intuitive about family dynamics. "Is Grandpapa very sick?" Charlotte asked quietly, her eyes wide with concern. William took a deep breath, knowing that the next words he spoke would mark the end of his children's innocence about mortality and the beginning of their understanding of loss. The weight of generations of royal duty pressed upon him as he prepared to guide his family through one of their darkest hours. "Yes, sweetheart, Grandpapa is very sick," William said gently, pulling Charlotte closer to him on the sofa. "The doctors have told us that the medicine isn't helping him get better anymore." George, always the most serious of the 3 children, looked directly at his father. "Is he going to die, Papa?" The directness of the question caught William off guard, even though he had been preparing for it. George's maturity sometimes surprised him, but in moments like this it was both a blessing and a burden. His eldest son was already learning to face difficult truths head-on, a skill that would serve him well in his future role, but that no 11-year-old should need to develop so early. "Yes, George, Grandpapa is going to die," William answered honestly. "The doctors think it will happen soon, probably in the next few weeks." Charlotte began to cry quietly, and Louis, not fully understanding but sensing his sister's distress, climbed into Catherine's lap. Catherine wrapped her arms around him while reaching out to comfort Charlotte as well. The family sat together in their grief, holding each other as the reality of the situation settled over them. "Can we see him?" George asked after several minutes. "Can we say goodbye?" "Of course," William replied. "Grandpapa wants to spend as much time with all of you as possible. He's coming home from the hospital tomorrow, and he'll be staying in his private apartments here at the palace. You can visit him whenever you want." Over the next hour, they answered the children's questions as honestly as possible, while trying to provide comfort and reassurance. They explained that Charles wasn't in pain, that he was surrounded by people who loved him, and that dying was a natural part of life that happened to everyone eventually. It was one of the most difficult conversations William had ever had, but he knew it was necessary. After tucking the children into bed, William and Catherine retreated to their own room. Emotionally drained from the day's events, they held each other in silence, both thinking about the massive changes that lay ahead. William would soon become king, a role he had been preparing for his entire life but never felt ready to assume. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as the palace prepared for Charles's return. Medical equipment was discreetly moved into his private apartments, and additional security measures were put in place. The palace's medical team worked with Charles's doctors to ensure he would be as comfortable as possible. During his final weeks, William spent the morning reviewing constitutional procedures with his private secretary. There were protocols to follow, documents to prepare, and ceremonies to plan. The machinery of monarchy continued to function even in the face of personal tragedy, a reminder of the institution's permanence beyond any individual life. When Charles arrived at the palace that afternoon, William was shocked by how much his father had deteriorated in just the few days since he had last seen him. The king looked frail and tired, but his eyes still held their familiar warmth and intelligence. He smiled when he saw William waiting for him. "Hello, son," Charles said softly as palace staff helped him into a wheelchair. "It's good to be home." They spent the afternoon together in Charles's sitting room, talking about practical matters that needed to be addressed. Charles wanted to review his will one final time, discuss arrangements for his funeral, and ensure that William understood his wishes regarding various charitable organizations and personal relationships. "I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become," Charles told his son as the afternoon light began to fade. "You're going to be an excellent king, William. Better than I ever was." "Don't say that, Papa," William protested. "You've been a wonderful king." "The country loves you," Charles smiled weakly. "The country tolerates me, but they will love you. You have something I never quite managed to achieve, the ability to connect with people from all walks of life. You make them feel seen and understood." That evening, the children visited their grandfather for the first time since learning about his condition. They were nervous at first, unsure how to behave around someone who was dying. But Charles quickly put them at ease with his gentle humor and genuine interest in their daily lives. He listened carefully as George told him about his cricket match. Charlotte shared her latest artwork, and Louis demonstrated the new magic trick he had learned. For those precious hours, it felt almost normal, like any evening when a grandfather was spending time with his beloved grandchildren. But William could see the effort it took for his father to maintain his energy and cheerfulness. Every smile was a conscious choice, every laugh a small victory against the disease that was slowly claiming his life. It was both heartbreaking and inspiring to witness such courage in the face of inevitable loss. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, William returned to his father's room. Charles was sitting by the window looking out at the garden where he had spent so many peaceful hours over the years. "There's something I need to tell you," Charles said without turning around. "Something I should have said years ago." William settled into the chair beside his father, sensing that this conversation would be important. "I know I wasn't always the father you needed when you were growing up," Charles continued. "I was so focused on my duties, on being the prince the country expected me to be, that I sometimes forgot to simply be your dad. I'm sorry for that." "Papa, you don't need to apologize," William began, but Charles held up his hand. "Let me finish, please. I want you to learn from my mistakes. Yes, being king is incredibly important, and you'll need to dedicate your life to serving the country. But don't forget to be present for your children the way I should have been for you. They need their father, not just their future king." William felt tears prick his eyes. He had never heard his father speak so openly about their relationship, and the honesty was both painful and healing. "I forgive you, Papa," William said quietly, "and I understand better now than I did when I was young. You were carrying an enormous burden, just like I will be soon." They sat together in comfortable silence as the palace settled into its nighttime quiet. Outside, London continued its restless sleep, unaware that inside these walls a father and son were sharing what might be their last honest conversation about love, duty, and the complicated legacy of royal responsibility. The following days settled into a strange new routine. William balanced his existing royal duties with spending time beside his father's bedside, while Catherine managed the children's schedules and emotions with her characteristic grace. The palace staff moved quietly through the corridors, their usual efficiency tinged with an undercurrent of sadness. Harry arrived from California on a rainy Tuesday morning, his face drawn with exhaustion from the long flight and the weight of the situation. Despite the tension that had existed between the brothers for years, they embraced at the airport without reservation. Death has a way of putting petty disagreements into perspective, and both men understood that their father needed them to be united during his final weeks. "How is he?" Harry asked as they drove through London streets toward the palace. "Weak, but still very much himself," William replied honestly. "He's been asking about you every day since I called. He wants to see you." The reunion between Charles and his younger son was emotional for everyone present. Harry knelt beside his father's chair, and Charles placed a trembling hand on his son's head in a gesture of blessing that seemed to transcend their recent difficulties. "My boy," Charles whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so glad you came home." "I'm sorry it took this for me to come back, Papa," Harry replied, his own voice breaking. "I should have been here sooner." "You're here now," Charles said simply. "That's what matters." Over the next few days, the two brothers found themselves working together in ways they hadn't for years. They took turns sitting with their father, coordinated visits from other family members, and began the delicate process of planning for what would come after. Their old easy friendship didn't return immediately, but the foundation for rebuilding their relationship was clearly being laid. William noticed changes in his father daily. Some mornings Charles would be alert and talkative, eager to discuss current events or share memories from his long life. Other days he would sleep most of the time, waking only for brief periods to acknowledge visitors or take small amounts of food. The children adapted to their grandfather's condition with the resilience that young people often display in difficult circumstances. They learned to be quieter during their visits, to be patient when he needed rest, and to treasure the moments when he was feeling well enough to engage with them fully. Charlotte took to drawing pictures for her grandfather, creating a new artwork each day to brighten his room. George would read to him from books about history and nature, topics they had always enjoyed discussing together. Louis, too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, simply climbed onto his grandfather's lap whenever possible, offering the pure, uncomplicated comfort that only a child can provide. One afternoon, while William was reviewing state papers in his father's sitting room, Charles suddenly spoke up from his chair by the window. "I need you to promise me something," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. William immediately set aside his documents and gave his father his full attention. "Anything, Papa. When I'm gone, I want you to find a way to heal the rift with Harry permanently. The monarchy needs both of you to be strong, but more importantly, you two need each other. Don't let pride or old wounds keep you apart." William nodded solemnly. "I promise. We've already started talking more these past few days. It's different now, better in some ways." "Good," Charles said with visible relief. "Your mother always said that family was the most important thing, more important than duty or tradition or public opinion. She was right about that, as she was about so many things." The mention of Diana brought a moment of shared silence. Both men carried their own memories of the woman who had been taken from them too soon, and whose influence continued to shape their understanding of what it meant to be both royal and human. As the second week of Charles's return to the palace began, it became clear that his condition was deteriorating more rapidly than the doctors had initially predicted. He slept most of the time now, and when he was awake, he often seemed confused about where he was or who was with him. Dr. Harrison called William aside after one of his daily examinations. "I think we need to prepare for the possibility that this could happen very soon," he said gently. "His body is shutting down faster than we anticipated. It's a matter of days now, not weeks." That evening, William gathered the family together in Charles's room. Catherine brought the children, Harry sat close to his father's bedside, and William held his father's hand as they all said their individual goodbyes. George, showing maturity, beyond his years, thanked his grandfather for all the lessons about history and responsibility. Charlotte presented him with her final drawing, a picture of the whole family together in the palace garden, everyone smiling under a bright blue sky. Louis simply hugged his grandfather and whispered, "I love you, Grandpapa," in his small, clear voice. Catherine spoke about how Charles had welcomed her into the family with such warmth and how grateful she was for his guidance as she learned to navigate royal life. Harry talked about childhood memories and expressed his gratitude for his father's unwavering love even during their difficult recent years. When it was William's turn, he found himself struggling to find the right words. How do you summarize a lifetime of love, respect, and complicated emotions in a few sentences? How do you say goodbye to the man who taught you everything about duty and service while also being the father you sometimes wished you could have known better? "Papa," William began, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "Thank you for showing me what it means to serve something greater than yourself. Thank you for your patience as I learned, for your wisdom when I needed guidance, and for your love even when I didn't deserve it. I promise to take care of the family and the country you've given your life to protect." Charles squeezed his son's hand weakly, a small smile crossing his face. "You already are," he whispered. That night, the family took turns staying with Charles, none of them wanting him to be alone. The palace was quieter than usual, with staff speaking in hushed tones and moving carefully through the corridors. Outside life in London continued as normal, but inside these ancient walls, time seemed suspended as everyone waited for the inevitable moment that would change everything. William sat in a chair beside his father's bed during the early morning, hours watching the steady rise and fall of Charles's breathing and thinking about the enormity of what lay ahead. Soon he would be king, with all the responsibilities and burdens the title carried. But tonight he was simply a son keeping vigil over his dying father, holding on to these final precious hours together. Dawn broke gray and somber over London, as William dozed fitfully in the chair beside his father's bed. He had barely slept for 3 days, determined not to miss a moment of Charles's final time. The sound of labored breathing filled the quiet room, punctuated occasionally by the soft footsteps of nurses checking on their patient. Catherine appeared in the doorway with a cup of tea and a gentle smile. She had been taking care of everyone else's needs while William focused entirely on his father, managing the children's routines and coordinating with palace staff to ensure everything continued running smoothly. "Any change?" she whispered, settling into the chair beside him. William shook his head, accepting the tea gratefully. "The doctor says it could be today. His breathing has been getting more irregular." They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had learned to communicate as much through shared presence as through words. Outside the window, London was waking up to another ordinary Thursday. People heading to work and school, unaware that their future king was spending what might be his father's last day on earth. Around mid-morning, Charles stirred and opened his eyes. For a moment he seemed confused about where he was, but then his gaze found William's face and he smiled weakly. "Still here, are you?" Charles asked, his voice barely audible. "Not going anywhere, Papa," William replied, leaning forward to take his father's hand. "Good boy," Charles whispered. "Always so stubborn. Gets it from your mother's side, I think." Despite everything, William found himself chuckling. Even now, facing death, his father could still make gentle jokes. It was quintessentially Charles, finding humor and humanity in even the darkest moments. Harry arrived shortly after, followed by the children, who had asked specifically to see their grandfather one more time. Charles seemed to rally slightly when they entered the room, managing to stay awake and alert for nearly an hour as they told him about their morning lessons and shared small updates about their friends and activities. "Grandpapa," Charlotte said seriously, taking his hand in her small ones, "when you go to heaven, will you watch over us?" Charles's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his granddaughter. "Every single day, my darling. Every single day." George stood straighter, unconsciously adopting the posture he had been taught for formal occasions. "Grandpapa, I promise I'll take care of Mama and Papa and help them be good leaders." "I know you will," Charles replied. "But remember to take care of yourself too, George. Being a good person is just as important as being a good prince." Louis, still too young to fully grasp the finality of the situation, climbed carefully onto the bed and snuggled against his grandfather's side. Charles wrapped his arm around the little boy, and they stayed like that for several minutes, grandfather and grandson sharing a moment of pure love and connection. As the afternoon wore on, Charles grew increasingly tired. The children were gently led away for their lunch and afternoon activities, though they were told they could return any time they wanted. Harry stepped out to make some phone calls to friends and family members who had asked to be kept informed of Charles's condition. This left William and Catherine alone with Charles as his breathing became more labored and irregular. The palace medical team had explained what to expect, but nothing could have truly prepared William for watching his father slowly slip away. "William," Charles said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been all day. "Come closer." William moved his chair right up to the bedside, taking his father's hand in both of his own. "There's something I need you to know," Charles continued, his eyes more focused than they had been in days. "Being king isn't about the crown or the ceremonies or the protocol. It's about love. Love for the country, love for the people, love for the institution we represent. Everything else is just window dressing." William nodded, hanging on every word. This felt like the most important lesson his father would ever teach him. "Your mother understood that better than I did when I was young," Charles went on. "She knew that people needed to see themselves reflected in their royal family. They needed to know that we cared about their struggles and their joys. Don't ever lose sight of that humanity, William. It's what will make you a great king." "I won't, Papa, I promise." Charles smiled and closed his eyes, seeming to relax for the first time in days. "I'm proud of you, son. I'm proud of the man you've become and the king you'll be. Take care of your family, take care of the country, and don't forget to take care of yourself." As evening approached, it became clear that Charles was entering his final hours. His breathing had become very shallow and irregular, and he was no longer responding to voices or touch. William called Harry and the children back into the room, wanting them all to be present when the moment came. They gathered around the bed, holding hands and sharing quiet words of love and farewell. The palace chaplain arrived to offer prayers and comfort, and the medical team monitored Charles's vital signs while staying discreetly in the background. At 11:47 p.m., as rain began to fall gently against the windows, Charles took his final breath. The transition was so peaceful that it took a moment for everyone to realize it had happened. William leaned forward and kissed his father's forehead, whispering, "Rest now, Papa. Your duty is done." The room fell silent except for the soft sound of crying and the gentle patter of rain outside. William stood up slowly, feeling the weight of his new reality settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He was no longer the Prince of Wales. He was the king. Catherine reached for his hand, offering her strength and support as she had done countless times before. Harry placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, and the children hugged their parents tightly, seeking comfort in the midst of their grief. Dr. Harrison stepped forward quietly to officially confirm what everyone already knew, and then the complex machinery of royal protocol began to move. Phone calls needed to be made, statements had to be prepared, and the country needed to be informed that they had a new monarch. But for these few precious minutes, before the outside world intruded, the family simply stood together in their grief, saying goodbye to a man who had been king, father, grandfather, and the steady center of their world for so many years. William looked down at his father's peaceful face and felt a mixture of profound sadness and overwhelming responsibility. The life he had known was over, and the life he had been preparing for his entire existence was about to begin. There would be time for tears later, but now he had a country to serve and a legacy to honor. "She's gone," he would need to tell the world soon, referring to the era that had ended with his father's passing. But first, he needed to be strong for his family and prepare for the enormous challenges that lay ahead. The first phone call came at midnight exactly. William stood in his father's study, now his study, holding the secure line that connected him directly to the Prime Minister. His voice was steady as he delivered the news that would change the nation. "Prime Minister, this is King William. I'm calling to inform you that my father, King Charles, passed away peacefully at 11:47 this evening." The formal words felt strange in his mouth. King William. Just hours ago, he had been the Prince of Wales, heir to the throne. Now he was the sovereign, the head of state, the person millions of people would look to for leadership and stability in uncertain times. The Prime Minister's response was immediate and respectful, offering condolences and asking about arrangements for the official announcement. They agreed that the news would be released to the public at 6 a.m., giving the family a few more hours of private grief before the world's attention descended upon them. After ending the call, William sat alone in the dark study, surrounded by his father's books and personal belongings. Everything in the room spoke of Charles's long life and varied interests. First edition volumes on architecture and environmental conservation, photographs from official visits around the world, small mementos from decades of public service. Catherine found him there an hour later, still sitting in the same chair, staring at a framed photograph of Charles with the children from the previous Christmas. "The children are finally asleep," she said softly, settling into the chair across from him. "Louis asked me 3 times if Grandpapa was really in heaven now. What did you tell him?" "The truth. That Grandpapa isn't suffering anymore, and that he'll always be watching over us." Catherine paused, studying her husband's face in the dim light. "How are you holding up?" William was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I keep thinking about all the things I should have said to him, all the conversations we should have had. There was so much I wanted to ask him about being king, about handling the pressure, about maintaining some sense of normalcy for our family." "He taught you more than you realize," Catherine said gently. "I've watched you learn from him for years, William." "You're ready for this, am I?" William's voice carried a vulnerability that few people ever heard. "This morning I was worried about a charity polo match next month. Tonight, I'm responsible for the constitutional monarchy of 16 countries. How does anyone prepare for that kind of change?" Catherine moved to sit on the arm of his chair, putting her hand on his shoulder. the same way your father did when his mother died. One day at a time, one decision at a time, with the support of people who love you and believe in you. They spent the next few hours making the necessary calls to family members around the world. Each conversation was difficult, requiring William to relive the evening's events while also providing comfort to others who were grieving. His Uncle Andrew, his Aunt Anne, various cousins and family friends. Everyone needed to hear the news directly from him before it became public knowledge. Harry proved invaluable during these hours, helping to coordinate with palace staff and manage the practical arrangements that needed immediate attention. The brothers worked side by side, their recent differences set aside in the face of their shared loss and their mutual commitment to honoring their father's memory. As dawn approached, the palace communications team gathered in the main conference room to finalize the official announcement. William reviewed the statement multiple times, ensuring that every word reflected both the gravity of the moment and the respect his father deserved. His Majesty, King Charles III, passed away peacefully at Buckingham Palace on the evening of November 9th, surrounded by his loving family. The king died as he lived, with dignity, grace, and unwavering dedication to the service of his people. His Majesty King William III has expressed his profound gratitude for the outpouring of love and support during this difficult time. At exactly 6 a.m., the statement was released simultaneously to news outlets around the world. Within minutes, every major television network had interrupted their regular programming with breaking news bulletins. Social media exploded with tributes and condolences from world leaders, celebrities, and ordinary citizens who felt a genuine connection to the royal family. William watched the coverage from his private sitting room, feeling surreal as he saw his own photograph displayed alongside the caption, "King William V." The formal portrait they were using had been taken just 6 months earlier for an official engagement, but he looked so different to himself now. The man in that photograph had been a prince looking forward to eventual kingship. The man watching the television was a king grappling with immediate responsibility. The children woke to find their world transformed. Overnight, their father had become the most important person in the country, and by extension, their own lives had changed dramatically. George, in particular, seemed to understand the magnitude of what had happened. As the new heir to the throne, his future had shifted as dramatically as his father's present. "Does this mean we have to move?" Charlotte asked over breakfast, which they ate privately in their family dining room while the palace buzzed with activity around them. "Not right away," William answered honestly. "We'll probably need to eventually, but we want to make sure any changes happen slowly, so you have time to adjust." "Will I still go to the same school?" George asked, his voice betraying anxiety beneath his attempt to sound mature about the situation. "For now, yes. We want your lives to stay as normal as possible," Catherine assured him. "Some things will change, but we'll face those changes together as a family." The morning brought a steady stream of visitors to the palace. The Archbishop of Canterbury came to offer prayers and discuss funeral arrangements. Senior government ministers arrived to brief the new king on urgent matters of state that couldn't wait for official mourning periods. Representatives from Commonwealth countries called to pledge their continued loyalty and support. Each meeting required William to step more fully into his new role. He had to make decisions about the funeral service, approve statements being issued in his name, and begin the complex process of planning his own coronation. The learning curve was steep, but he found that his years of preparation had given him a stronger foundation than he had realized. One of the most difficult moments came when he had to record a brief video message to the nation. Standing in the same room where his father had delivered countless addresses to the British people, William struggled to find words that would comfort a grieving nation while also introducing himself as their new monarch. "My father devoted his life to serving this great nation and its people," he said, looking directly into the camera. "He taught me that kingship is not about privilege or power, but about responsibility and service. I pledge to honor his memory by dedicating my own life to the same ideals that guided him." The video was broadcast that evening, and the response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. People praised his composure, his obvious grief, and his commitment to continuing his father's work. Social media filled with messages of support and encouragement from people who recognized the enormous burden he had suddenly inherited. As his first day as king drew to a close, William found himself back in his father's study, now working through briefing papers that had been prepared months in advance for this transition. The documents covered everything from constitutional procedures to security protocols, but they couldn't address the emotional complexity of suddenly becoming the person everyone looked to for leadership and stability. Catherine joined him again, bringing tea and sitting quietly while he worked. After 30 years together, they had developed the kind of partnership that required few words but provided immense comfort through simple presence. "Do you think he would be proud?" William asked suddenly, looking up from the papers spread across the desk. "I think he already told you he was proud," Catherine replied. "And I think he knew you were ready for this, even if you don't feel ready yourself." Outside, London was adjusting to its new reality. Flags flew at half-mast, flowers were being placed at palace gates, and people gathered in small groups to share memories of the king who had died and express their hopes for the king who had just begun his reign. 2 weeks had passed since that terrible night when everything changed. The state funeral had been magnificent and heartbreaking, watched by billions of people around the world who came together to honor a king who had served with quiet dignity for decades. William had walked behind his father's coffin through the streets of London, flanked by Harry and other family members, while the nation said its final goodbye to King Charles III. Now, in the aftermath of that grand ceremony, William faced the more intimate challenge of learning to live as king, rather than simply performing the role during moments of crisis. Every morning brought decisions that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier, and every evening found him exhausted by the weight of constant responsibility. The children were struggling too, though they tried to hide it. George had become unusually serious, as if he felt the need to grow up overnight to match his new status as heir to the throne. Charlotte asked fewer questions than usual, and Louis had started having nightmares that brought him running to his parents' room in the middle of the night. "I think we need to get away for a few days," Catherine suggested one evening as they watched the children pick at their dinner. "Somewhere private where we can just be a family without the weight of protocol and procedure." William looked around the formal dining room, where they now took most of their meals, noting how different it felt from the cozy family kitchen, where they used to eat when he was still a prince. Even their most basic routines had been transformed by his accession to the throne. "Balmoral," he suggested. "Papa always said it was the one place where he could think clearly." Catherine nodded. "The children love it there, and we could use some time to process everything that's happened without constantly being on display." The next morning, William made one of his first major decisions as king. He cleared his schedule for a week and announced that the royal family would be taking private time to grieve and adjust to their new circumstances. It was an unprecedented move that raised eyebrows among palace staff, but William was determined to put his family's well-being first. The drive to Scotland gave them their first taste of real privacy in weeks. Away from the constant presence of photographers and the formal atmosphere of official residences, the family began to relax for the first time since Charles's death. The children chattered excitedly about seeing the countryside, and even William felt some of the tension leave his shoulders as London disappeared behind them. Balmoral in November was cold and windswept, but the castle felt like a sanctuary. This was where Charles had been happiest, where he had taught William about conservation and land management, where the family had spent some of their most treasured times together. Walking through the familiar rooms, William could almost hear his father's voice explaining the history of each painting or piece of furniture. On their second day at the castle, William took the children for a long walk across the moors that their grandfather had loved so much. The landscape was stark and beautiful, with rolling hills stretching to the horizon under a gray sky that threatened rain. "Papa," George said as they climbed a small hill overlooking a loch, "do you think Grandpapa can see us here?" William stopped walking and looked around at the scenery that had meant so much to his father. "I think if he can see us anywhere, it would be here." This was his favorite place in the world. Charlotte bent down to pick up a smooth stone from the path. "I want to keep this to remember him," she said, tucking it carefully into her pocket. "That's a lovely idea," William said, finding his own stone to carry. "We can start a collection of special rocks from places that remind us of Grandpapa." Louis, not to be outdone, began gathering pebbles with great enthusiasm, declaring that he would build a castle for his grandfather in heaven. The simple innocence of his gesture made William smile for the first time in days. That evening, they sat together in front of a roaring fire in the castle's main sitting room, playing board games and telling stories about Charles. For the first time since becoming king, William felt like he could simply be a father and husband, without the constant pressure of representing something larger than himself. "Tell us about when you were little and came here with Grandpapa," Charlotte requested. Curling up against her father's side, William smiled, remembering those long-ago summers when he and Harry would run wild across the Scottish countryside, while their father taught them about wildlife and conservation. "Your grandfather used to wake us up before dawn to watch the deer," he began. "He said the early morning was when you could see them best, before the day got busy and they hid in the forests." As he told the story, William realized that these memories were among his most precious possessions now. They represented not just his relationship with his father, but also the foundation of values and experiences that would guide him as king. Charles had used these informal moments to teach lessons about responsibility, respect for nature, and the importance of understanding the land and people you're meant to serve. The week at Balmoral passed too quickly, but it served its purpose. The family returned to London refreshed and more equipped to handle their new reality. The children seemed more settled, and William felt he had gained some perspective on the challenge ahead of him. His first major test as king came during a constitutional crisis that erupted just days after their return. A political scandal had rocked the government, and there were calls for the prime minister to resign. As head of state, William needed to navigate the situation carefully, maintaining the monarchy's traditional political neutrality while ensuring constitutional processes were followed properly. The meetings with government officials and constitutional experts reminded William of everything his father had tried to teach him about the delicate balance between royal authority and democratic governance. He found himself drawing on conversations from years past, remembering Charles's wisdom about when to speak and when to remain silent, when to offer guidance and when to step back. After 3 days of careful consultation and deliberation, the crisis was resolved through established parliamentary procedures, with minimal involvement from the Crown. It was exactly the kind of outcome Charles would have achieved, and William felt his first real sense of confidence in his ability to fulfill his constitutional role. The personal milestone came a month later, during the children's first public appearance since their grandfather's death. They were attending a charity event that Catherine had been supporting for years, and the media attention was intense. William watched nervously as photographers captured every moment, remembering how overwhelming such scrutiny had been during his own childhood. But George, Charlotte, and Louis handled themselves with remarkable poise. They spoke politely to guests, showed genuine interest in the charity's work, and maintained their composure even when faced with dozens of cameras. Watching them, William felt pride mixed with sadness, pride in their maturity and grace, but sadness that they had to grow up so quickly in the public eye. That evening, as the family relaxed at home after the successful public appearance, William reflected on how much had changed since that terrible night when his father died. The raw grief was still there, probably always would be, but it had been joined by something else, a growing sense of purpose and confidence in his ability to honor his father's legacy while creating his own. "You did well today," Catherine told him as they prepared for bed. "Charles would have been proud of how you handled everything." William nodded, thinking about the long road ahead. There would be more crises to navigate, more public appearances to manage, more difficult decisions to make. But for the first time since becoming king, he felt truly ready for the challenge. Standing at the window of their bedroom, looking out over the lights of London, William whispered words that only Catherine could hear. "She's gone, Papa. The old era has ended. But I promise the new one will honor everything you taught me about service, duty, and love." The city spread out below them, millions of people going about their evening routines, unaware that their king was making a quiet promise to a father who could no longer hear him, but whose influence would guide every decision of the reign to come.